mentioned last week that we're doing the history of the Balkans, and so, not the Balkans, we're doing the history of Yugoslavia, and this is the first week on it, and this week we're just gonna, basically all I'm gonna say this week is that there were a bunch of ethnic groups. I'm going to talk about kind of the politics of ethnicity and how ethnicity is kind of invented, right? It's not some neutral or whatever fact that exists plainly out there. It's something that's kind of created by humans. And it changes as well. I also want to go through and talk about kind of the different ethnicities that will come up in the rest of the series. And the thing is with this first episode is that there's actually not there's not a huge amount of other content, like video content or podcast content out there about kind of the early days of the pan-Slavist movement. Yeah, at all. And there's no place that clearly goes through kind of each ethnicity and explains it online, kind of in like a video or a podcast format, which are the formats that I like. Even audiobooks. Like, I can't particularly think of an audiobook which does it the way that I want it to be done. Basically what I'm doing here is I'm setting up a series that will be done the way that I would have wanted to be taught back when I started kind of teaching myself this. God, that PowerPoint. This is like the best corner in my room to do this, and I'm aware that it's still not the greatest. The sort of hard politics of Yugoslavia, and by hard politics I mean the institutionalization of a political idea into kind of legal manifestation. I guess another form of hard politics would be political parties is another form of hard politics. I don't know how you would describe that. What I'm trying to get around here is institutionalism in its kind of really modern form. It includes all sorts of institutions that aren't those like necessarily hard. They're not very material. They're they're not like a political party where there are often written structures and guidelines about how they conduct themselves and all that sort of thing. Anyway, so what I'm saying is that Yugoslavia, the way it was institutionalized in this kind of material way, the way that it ended up being, was a group of ethnicities. At first, the only recognized ethnicities were the Slovenes, the Croats, and the Serbs. That was in the first kingdom of Slovenes, Croats, and Serbs, which then got renamed, I believe, after King Alexander came in. It got renamed into the Kingdom of Yugoslavia. I helpfully have my globe here, so you don't have to run away. It's literally impossible to see now, basically, on a globe. But it's over there. So it's next to Italy on the Adriatic. Obviously, today there is no institutionalized Yugoslavia, which is incredibly sad to me, and that'll be something that we cover in another episode, and definitely one of the later episodes. Yeah, but I think that it's important to at least briefly mention that, I mean, I am a pan-everythingist. I'm a pan-Slavist, I'm a pan-African, I just see pan-European. I'm a huge fan of the EU. I think we need less division, basically, in society. That is my general vibe. I think we need more things that I think we need to be looking for things that we agree on and things that can bring us together, and those sorts of things, being in those and not being forced, but not being too much of a laggard either. Being in those, I think, is a force for peace and certainly prosperity. I really want to nail down that the end of Yugoslavia was not, in my humble opinion, inevitable. I don't think it was inevitable that Yugoslavia was going to end the way that it did. I don't think that the people, the idealists, doing the soft politics back at the start, the people doing the politics which, was not, maybe hadn't manifested into big systems or whatever. There were pan-Slavists back in the 17th century, apparently, according to the Wikipedia article. I don't think anyone back at the start, or anyone back, the partisans or whatever in World War II, or really, I don't know, I could be wrong, but I can't imagine that even the people who were kind of forced under the kingdom of Yugoslavia to be there, I don't think they would have thought that in however many years' time, 70, is it 70? I'm a social scientist. I feel like 70 years' time that Yugoslavia would really fall so hard and destroy so many people. The way that it ended, to me, is, I don't know how I'm going to cover it. It's going to be hard, and I'll probably have to do kind of multiple episodes on it because there are a series of wars in there. But yeah, but to me it sucks. It's like if the European Union ended that way, which is a terrible thing to say, but that to me is what it's like, because I am such a idealist in that way, and seeing a system which is built on different peoples coming together falling apart as hard as it did, really, I won't say it shatters my idealism, because I'm still an idealist, but it really does, it hurts, and it makes me look for explanations, and it makes me think about why that happened. So you need a politics which is we all have our own identity, but in this beautiful way, we all come together and live together in peace. And that has happened before in the Balkans. It's not, I do think that people overstate how common it was, but it was there. There have always been parts of the world, small parts of the world, where people with very different beliefs have lived together and around each other, bought things from each other, traded things with each other, had dinner together, and not had major wars together all the time. I mean, there are places in the Balkans right now that there, in fact, even throughout the war, there were loads of people who lived in the Balkans who did not want to be fighting, didn't want to kill each other, did not want to be involved. They just were unfortunate enough to be stuck there among the fighting, and they were, what do they call it? Collateral damage. Their presence was not, actually kind of was considered politically, but yeah, they were there. They got, mental damage. A lot of them, well, a not insignificant number of people actually died, right? And, there are a lot of people who just want to live in peace, who do not do anything to hurt anyone else, and they die in these ethnic, religious type conflicts. Sarajevo today is known for having a load of different ethnic religious groups. That's why the fighting was so hard in the 90s in Sarajevo. But today they live in peace. Alright, so anyway, I totally think that it's possible for a Yugoslavia to exist. And I don't think you need Tito for Yugoslavia to exist. That being said, let's get into these ethnic groups and let's explain who they are, and let's explain the fact that it is actually a moving feast, as they say. So let's start with the Serbs. Serbs, one you may have heard of. So the Serbs, they're predominantly Eastern Orthodox. That is, from my understanding, the same church as the Russian church, because Serbia and Russia are friends. Oh, it's Russian Orthodox. Okay, but it's a type of Eastern Orthodox. Okay, so the Serbs are Eastern Orthodox Christians mainly. Although there is diversity in them. You will find Jewish Serbs. You will find Muslim Serbs. Probably more Muslim than Jewish, but you'll find both. You'll find Serbs of all sorts of things. So there was a battle in 1389 called the Battle of Kosovo Polje. So the Serbs, a lot of their identity is built around this one battle, and it was actually a battle they lost. To me, it is kind of funny, this story, because it sounds like the story that one would make up if they lost a battle and then come and tell someone and then hope that they'll just be like, oh, okay, that's kind of funny, and then move on. But this story has stuck. This has been quite a sticky one, and it is that in the Battle of Kosovo, Kosovo is a place, it's also a country now, but the Battle of Kosovo was a Serbian battle against the Ottomans, Turkish forces, and it did not go well. They lost. But the leader at the time, he said there was a grey falcon, and that grey falcon had told him that either he could win the battle, and that would be all great, they would have won the battle, or he can lose the battle, but gain, people, it's not very clear to me, maybe it's a language translation thing, but kind of gain this level of protection, godliness is on for the Serbs, protection for them if he lost the battle. And so this has been something that has stuck and remains stuck, and it baffles me, but they have really bought this story, and it has become a huge part of national mythology, and in the 90s it blew up, basically, as in the 90s, and actually kind of I think early 2000s as well. This Kosovo thing was still very much present, it blew up and it became this huge discussion about, the kind of Serbia's promised land and all of that in Kosovo. It's incredible. As a total outsider, as like when I was learning about this, I was like, wow, like, I mean, that there must be loads of things that we have today that we value disproportionately because of these kind of myths. It's just this one is, to me as an outsider, such a clear example of kind of such a random piece of land. I mean, it's quite a small piece of land as well, and it's not very valuable, but being wanted so much because of some kind of myth. And yeah, anyway, so they have the Battle of Kosovo, and its meaning has shifted and developed, and so that is kind of a huge part of their national identity, I would say. They also have, the Serbs have also experienced kind of like tragedies basically to them as a people in a way, because if you're ethnically cleansing a part of a group, it's something that the group takes as a whole. It's something that they all get. It becomes part of their identity, right? And so that happened in World War II, under the Ustaša. What else have they experienced? Like, Serb leaders played a disproportionate role in bringing Yugoslavia together in the first place. The first Yugoslavia, and having the first instantiation of the thing made it a lot easier for the second one to also come into being as well. And that's kind of, I think, part of their national mythology as well, is that they've always been trying to bring everyone together. Obviously, kind of assimilating them more than what the other would want. But yeah, I think that it's fair to say the Serbs have kind of attempted to bring people together in Yugoslavia. Unfortunately, they then got, I can't get around this treating them like they're kind of a uniform blob. But yeah, a lot of them, a number of Serbs, got very taken in by the nationalist politics of Slobodan Milosevic. There were a lot of awful things that the Serbs did throughout the 90s war. This is embarrassing. I know very little about Serbian kind of culture outside of those things, the big political things. I do know that it's like all over the Balkans. It's a very cheap place, which means it's also a very poor place. I think the minimum wage, I saw it and I was like, that's for a month. It was something like what you would get paid for 1 or 2 days work, minimum wage here in Australia. And I feel fucking poor, and I've worked my ass off in minimum wage jobs. I guess I am still fucking poor by Australian standards. This is why I need to move to Sarajevo. Okay, so that's the Serbs. Then there's the Croats. They're the next big identity group there. Catholics, that checks out. And there's a small minority of Orthodox Christians and Muslims. And actually an incredibly small minority of Protestants. We're talking respectively 78.97%, 3.32%, 1.32%, and 0.26% Catholic, Orthodox, Muslim, and Protestant. So, what's that? This is very interesting. The Balkans must have been a very it kind of makes sense. Yeah, I mean, this is kind of leads into another conversation, which is like, where is the Balkans? Like, I mean, obviously, I can see it on the map, but there is a bit of disagreement kind of about whether it's in Europe, on the doorstep of Europe, not in Europe, whether there are perhaps parts of the Balkans which are like more in Europe than others. You know, it kind of upsets the current politicians of like Western Europe. It upsets them in both the like mentally upset, but also like it kind of just upsets like in like the way that like you can upset a table. Like it upsets them to think that there are actually countries in Europe that are majority Muslim countries we will get to, and that have been there all along. Like, I mean, you know, the country itself hasn't been there all along. The people have, and they've been Muslim for how long? Like, at least 400 years. The problem is with the way that we think about Europe is that it avoids the fact that Europe has always mixed with the places around it. And like, you know, people came up to Europe from Africa and like through the Fertile Crescent. And like, those places have always been essential to Europe and essential to the development of Europe, essential to the development of ideas in Europe, essential to the development of like just ideas while the Dark Ages was going on. You know, like it's insane to me the way that people see Europe as such a cleanly boxed off location that is, I mean, the way that conservatives see it is like kind of like pure, like purity is like a huge thing in conservatism. It's pure, and obviously a certain skin color, we can say it. Let's all say it, white. And that, you know, somehow people who come from places, literally, if you grab a map, you see them all there. They're all around. Always been involved. The Roman Empire, I mean, God forbid you think of it more than once a day, but the Roman Empire, all around. You know, the Ottoman Empire went right into the Balkans and all around the Middle East, right? Down to Libya, I think. The Byzantines, you know, did similar stuff. Like, Europe has always been involved with its neighbours. Like, the Balkans is a huge contested area for conservatives and their Europeanness, because obviously Greece is kind of at the bottom of the Balkans, and between Greece and places that, you know, you would 100% consider as Europe, where might that be? I would say Austria would probably be the first time you go up and you're like, I can't imagine anyone claiming that Austria is not in Europe. But literally directly between Greece and Austria, there is a country called Albania, which is Muslim. There's also Kosovo, which is also Muslim. And then there's Bosnia, which has a mix. It has a very heavy Muslim population in the center and around the periphery bit, there's a lot of Serbs. Yeah, so there's Muslims in the Balkans, and I mean, I'm kind of already on that topic, so might as well stick with it for a bit. The thing about naming the Muslims in the Balkans is it's kind of a little bit unfair, because you have the Serbs. I mean, really, they're just Christian. You have the Croats. Really, they're just Christian. And then you have the Muslims, and you're like, but that's kind of not fair, because the Serbs and the Croats, they each get their own title for their ethnic group. The Muslims, you're not even saying whether they're like Shia or Sunni or whatever, you're just saying, oh, they're Muslims. And the unfortunate thing is that has just not been resolved. So we have to stick with calling them Muslims. There are Muslims from different parts. There are Albanian Muslims. There are Bosniaks, like Bosnian Muslims. There are Kosovo Albanians. But yeah, there's a problem, because these other groups, the Croats, the Serbs, the Slovenes, they all have an identity outside of their religion, but then you have the Muslims who don't. There are smaller minority groups in the Balkans, and I don't know much about them, but there are the Roma, the Jews. There's some Jews in the Balkans. So then there's jumping back, we just covered the Muslims, and then we got the Croats. What other fun facts do I have about the Croats? Croatia is in the EU. Croatia is the only country, apart from Slovenia, to have joined the EU. And actually, just this year, they adopted the euro, which is a win. I was very excited. I was like, I mean, there's very rarely any news from the Balkans at all, really, now, which is great. No news is good news in any world. But, you know, when the news came through, I was like, oh, cool. Some an obscure place that I know a lot about has just adopted the euro, which is epic. And I wish that Europe would continue to expand. I wish that European Union didn't kind of stop expanding. But like I wish that more Balkan countries could get, really considered for accession into the EU. But that's a huge thing. That's great. I'm very happy for them. Very happy for Croatia. Slovenia seems to just be like the Slovenes. I feel sorry for them, honestly. Like they have never, from what I can see, had much power in this whole world. Okay. Yeah, because Croatians, politically, they always had some level of power, even in, I think, in the first Yugoslavia, they had some kind of representation. And then in Tito's Yugoslavia, they had a little bit, they were never the dominant ethnic group, but, being such a large minority, they had some amount of power. But then the Slovenes were always just tacked on. I do know that they're rich. Rich. They're not rich. They're considered by other Balkan countries to be rich. They could secede from Yugoslavia with no particular problems because of geography and because of wealth. They had money, so it wasn't like they needed to be part of Yugoslavia. And they were just too far distant from, Serbia, basically, to have to deal with that. I think also there's mountains, or like big hills at least, that separate them a bit. Croatia has in it Dalmatia, which is really interesting to me, because I was reading a book from, what's her name? It's mentioned in one of these other books. It's called Black Lamb and Grey Falcon, from the 1930s, and sorry, I actually can't remember. I think it's the 1930s. Yeah. And she is so cool. I love her so much. Like all of her commentary always brings a smile, sometimes a laugh to my face. She's epic. Literally, I love her. Anyway, so it's her journey through Yugoslavia, and it is so fascinating. Like the whole thing. Like, she travelled to Dalmatia, and I was like, where's Dalmatia? I've never heard of that. And that's in Croatia. So I have read that there are still Croats who identify as Dalmatian, but the thing didn't say that they identify just as Dalmatian. I think the thing was also biased because I think it was like a Croat source. Anyway, so that's a whole interesting side note. We are back with the national myths of these nations. I do kind of have a problem with sharing these national stories. It's complicated for me because I'm a Yugoslav at heart. Yugoslav in the sense of like a union of South Slavs, does not necessarily in the particular political manifestations that it has had in the past, but definitely pro-union. Because I'm that, I do struggle with, kind of reifying these national identities. But at the same time, like, it is possible to have a national identity and be part of a broader nation and live kind of in harmony, I think. So, I don't know. There's that. So we've done Serbs. They have the 1389 Grey Falcon thing. And they have medieval Serbia. And now we're going to do Croatia, which had a medieval thing as well. And kind of its big thing was its first king, apparently. If there are any Croats in the audience, if you can think of any other big kind of big things through which you define your nation, put them in the comments, Okay, so their first king was called Tomislav, and he reigned somewhere around 925 to 928. Apparently it's a contested thing. The dates aren't clear necessarily, but nonetheless, that's about as accurate as we can get. So there you go. And he allied Croatia with Byzantium and against Bulgaria. So there's that. And he spent some time as a duke before that. So yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Someone like that would be considered a big figure in the creation of a nation. In all likelihood, this Tomislav fellow, the view of him has probably changed over time. The other thing about Croatia is that it seems to have had like, there have been political manifestations of Croatia in very different border. So I told you about Dalmatia. That's been adopted by Croatia since 1945. But there was this other thing. It was the Union of Croatia. I want to say like Slavonia or something. Yeah, Slavonia. I don't know what Slavonia is, but yeah, like if you look at a map of Croatia, its borders have changed quite considerably over its history. Like if you look at one particular map of Croatia, it's like this, and then if you look at Croatia today, it's this, Dalmatia, and this Slavonia thing, kind of more like that way-ish. Croatia, Dalmatia, Slavonia. Okay, the word is, I'm going to butcher it, by the way, Kleinstrateri. Kleinstaateei. The word for like the way that the German states were, like how like splintered and everything was. Yeah, you don't have to look too far into the medieval history of the bits that make up Yugoslavia, especially like the more northern bits, and you can see that big time. Slovenia, not to be confused with that other thing, Slavonia or whatever it was, not to be confused with the thing which is now part of Croatia. Slovenia, the thing right at the top of the map of Yugoslavia, that was in the Holy Roman Empire, which is a whole other business, but it wasn't in it as Slovenia, of course. It was even smaller, it was even smaller bits and constantly changing. And Slovenia is a very mysterious place to me because it doesn't really seem to have anything except language as its national identity. Like, generally nations need something a little bit more than just language, but I guess if your language is so different to other languages, then maybe you can get by with just Slovenian. But let's see what it has. So, yeah. Apparently the alpine landscape and nature are a big one. And I think, I've definitely heard this before, that their secession from Yugoslavia being compared to any other secession from Yugoslavia being peaceful has become a huge part of their identity today. And I mentioned, before, like they're a bit richer than other post-Yugoslav states. So, yeah. This may not be part of their national identity, but I know that they have an incredibly high score on Freedom House. Yeah, so there's that. Because I think Slovenia is so far north, it's almost not in the Balkans anymore. Like, Greece is so far south that people make the claim that it's not in the Balkans. And I feel like Slovenia is so far north that the claim can be made that it's not in the Balkans. By the way, the term Balkans is generally considered kind of derogatory, which is interesting. And it's also a newish term. Newish by the standards of how long history goes in this region. It used to just refer to something you would cross, the interior of the Balkan. like slopes. I don't know, mystery, but yeah, yeah. So I mean, it like there's kind of a meme that I saw where it's like they're trying to point out where the Balkans are on a map, and like it was like each state trying to argue that it's not in the Balkans because either it's too far north or too far south. That's Slovenian myths. National movements developed across Europe at different periods, but you know, I kind of feel like the national movements of people like the Slovenians was not too far after the national movements of, say, you know, the Italians or the Germans. I don't think there was ever really a national movement for like Yugoslavs in the sense of the state which ended up materializing, you know, because there are Slavs all over the place, and there's Czechoslovakia which ended up materializing as well. You know, and there was definitely a pan-Slavist movement, which I'll get into a little bit. But yeah, yeah, so it says here that the national movement for Slovenes kind of started in the 19th and the 20th centuries. Yeah, I feel like it's worth touching on a couple of things I will get into like later on in the series. I feel like when I get into, I don't know when I'll really approach these. Unfortunately, I think perhaps Montenegro and North Macedonia might be ones which I kind of only developed my discussion on quite late in the series. I'm just being honest and real, because it's really hard to find sources, basically. English sources that I find to be trustworthy on North Macedonia and Montenegro, and especially like how Montenegro came to be. Like, you know, Montenegro, for those who don't know, was kind of the last one to secede, I think. It seceded from Serbia in 2006. So, yeah, and apparently a lot of Montenegrins kind of interchangeably identify as Serb. So, yeah, that's kind of an interesting one. Might be one for later, but I just thought it would be worth touching on the fact that I am aware that today there are successor states to Yugoslavia which weren't really covered, I guess. I mean, Montenegro is not what I'm talking about, but like North Macedonia is a successor state to Yugoslavia, which has been, that land has been cut up in various different ways throughout its history, and yeah, to like, it's really only recent that North Macedonia, can I just call it Macedonia? That Macedonia has been like an actual independent political entity. And, you know, it's been very controversial with the Greeks. And yeah, finding, you know, finding sources that I trust on that is kind of difficult. But yeah, I mean, I just wanted to flag that exists. Also, Montenegro apparently had its own kingdom and everything. Like it was, you know, not a big deal, but like it was a real deal. You know what I mean? I think in the Middle Ages. So it's kind of interesting. Like it, yeah. I could go down a whole rabbit hole about like how, you know, when weapons were a lot crappier, like Montenegro was able to sustain itself. But then when weapons got like pretty good, it got defeated. But then when weapons got so good, like, you know, the atomic bomb and all that, and society had to reshape itself because of those, it was only then after that that Montenegro was able to actually reform and like recreate its, like, create a statehood. So yeah, anyway, yeah, I kind of touched on that. Oh yeah, I wanted to say, like, I have talked a little bit about how ethnic identity is not this kind of fixed thing, that it kind of changes, develops, and you know, politics is right there, changing it, developing it, making people see things through different light, taking things on, leaving things off, in terms of developing on their like ethnic identity. I wanted to say that this will not be the last you hear of the development of ethnic identity. It's kind of organically through this series I will have to touch on it more. There's a book that I want to read about King Alexander and his Yugoslavia and how he saw ethnic identity, because I mean we'll get into, you know, all that down the track, but like he did some interesting things. I mean the biggest one that stands out to me is that he got rid of the old divisions, the political divisions, like, you know, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Serbia, the, you know, Dalmatia, Croatia, Slavonia, whatever it is, Slovenia. Like he cut everything up into teeny tiny little chunks, and you can still see the outlines of the old states. And intriguingly, Serbia is only cut in, like, I think half, maybe into thirds. It's like oddly not so divided compared to the other ones. But yeah, I want to look into him because that'll be an interesting discussion on how, basically, like, how he as a politician saw what the best way for ethnicity to be done, like to serve what he saw as like his interests, and, you know, like his, like, because obviously any higher up politician of the country would probably want that country to continue in some way, shape or form. They may not want it to continue in the way that it is today, but generally they don't think, oh, I'm now the leader of a country, I now want my country to get smaller. Like, you know, I want it to just shrink back down to Serbia, whatever. So whatever his policies were, like his carving up the way that he did, it would have been to serve that kind of ideal of, I think, like for him at that time, assimilation, like assimilating the people into kind of one Yugoslavia. Or maybe it could be that he was trying to get rid of like old kind of, I mean that's also assimilation, like get rid of like old kind of tribalistic divisions that, you know, he didn't see as being necessary in the New World. Right, I want to finish my thing on Pan-Slavism before I get into the Bosnian crisis. And once I'm done the Bosnian crisis, we'll be done for this episode. Pan-Slavism started as a literary movement. which is interesting because, you know, you don't think about that sort of thing. I guess it's kind of like post-colonialism in a way. It started as a literary movement and moved into more of a, I guess, a more strongly, or perhaps a more pragmatic political movement. Okay, I want to differentiate two things. So there's pan-Slavism, but then there's also this kind of like more pragmatic, I think it's like Austro-Hungarian pan-Slavism. It was kind of this, you know, like it makes a lot of sense. If you don't have the ability to easily overthrow the empire, which is, you know, sitting on you, like, why not just create your own national identity within that empire and just kind of vibe? That was what Austro-Hungarian pan-Slavism was. And so it was kind of like all about the people kind of still living under, you know, a government which would be probably better for them not to live under in, you know, many cases. But nevertheless, they kind of had to be there. So it was like, how about we make this a vibe and be, you know, Pan-Slavs right here? Like, we can, you know, share literature. We can have a magazine which has, you know, the same article in all the different languages. The nationalism in Pan-Slavist literature wasn't a nationalism for a nation state. It was a nationalism for kind of a sense of nation through literary works and all of that kind of stuff. Pan-Slavism developed as a literary movement, I want to say in the 17th century, developed more. It seems that, interestingly, Czechia seems to be a place where a bunch of Pan-Slavists have come from. There was this gymnastics movement that was not just a gymnastics movement. I want to say it's called the Sokol. This gymnastics movement started in Czechia and it went pan-Slavist, like literally from Prague to Warsaw to Moscow to Belgrade. Anyway, so he created this gymnastics movement, and like at first I was like, oh my god, this is going to be a hilarious story. You know, we just talk about these gymnasts and their, you know, like the activism, the gymnastic activism. It sounds like something, you know, out of Los Angeles or whatever. Like anyway, so they had these gymnasts, but they weren't just gymnasts. Like they were politically minded gymnasts, and they were organizing in collectivist organizations more and more as time went by. Like kind of at first it was more of a petty bourgeois thing, and then it turned into more of a proletariat thing. And they were like, I'm sure you know that today gymnastics is kind of more of an individualistic kind of sport. Like it's all about, you know, your own personal, I don't know, flexibility, whatever, and competing one-on-one individually, all that. But they would have these massive meetups where it's actually like stacks of gymnasts and against stacks of gymnasts, and I don't understand how they work. I know nothing about sport, but it was just fascinating to me, and it became like that way of organizing triggered, but also was part of like the, you know, the fact that it was kind of a bit of a proletariat thing, a little bit like it, you know, it had a flavor to it, you could say. It actually ended up getting banned by the Nazis and then got banned and censored by the Soviets. And in Poland, just, like, I think last year or the year before, this group was celebrated in their parliament or something, or a couple of years ago. Anyway, it's very interesting. It was a Pan-Slavist group, and they used the Pan-Slavist song as well. And yes, there is a song. The song actually got co-opted and used by the Yugoslavian state as their national song. They just deleted a couple lines and added a couple lines about how, like, you know, the traitor is the enemy or something like that. But yeah, like, they had a song, an anthem. It was apparently originally just a Slovakian anthem, and then, like, it was, you know, they just changed the word from Slovak to, like, Slav or whatever, and it became a Pan-Slavist anthem. Pretty cool. So yeah, they had a song, they had writers, and they had gymnasts. So now that I've kind of explained Pan-Slavism, and, you know, I feel like you need to understand that Pan-Slavism was a necessary condition for any kind of an idea of Yugoslavia to ever work. Like, I don't think anyone would be able to imagine a Yugoslavia in a world where you couldn't have people with different languages and different religious beliefs under one roof. Like, you need to have something that ties them together. And the idea of being a Slav, being a part of a collective, I think contributed a lot to the ability for Yugoslavia to actually exist. Okay, so then you have the Bosnian crisis. And as I say, this is the last point, so I'll get to go to bed soon. But the Bosnian crisis happened in 1878, and this was when Serbia wanted Bosnia, and Russia backed Serbia, but the Austro-Hungarians also wanted Bosnia. Oh, and Bosnia was Ottoman. But, you know, everyone knew at this point that the Ottomans were kind of on the decline. They would become known very quickly as the sick man of Europe, which is, like, one of my favourite things to say. I don't know why, So, you have the Bosnian crisis. And I mean, this Bosnian crisis could have been the start of World War One. Like, it was, you know, it was some solid work that stopped it from being that. And, yeah, or it was just the great powers were working on other things, and they weren't so into the idea of having, you know, a big war or whatever. You know, maybe Germany wasn't ready to go to war with France yet. Any weasels. So there's that. Russia gets behind Serbia. Austria-Hungary is backed by Germany. Oh yeah, I wrote here. This gets into alliance politics, which I don't particularly understand. You know, we're all like, oh, well, if you're in an alliance with someone, it means, like, if you get invaded, automatically you'll go and invade that person. But, like, alliances can be so complicated. You can have so many different clauses, sub-clauses, whatever. And then, like, people can just not follow them at the end of it. Like, you know, you are two separate individual nation states. You can make your own decision at the end of the day. You know, and like, there are kind of, I feel like some alliances may be slightly more offensive, some might be slightly more defensive, like some might be slightly more wait and see. You know, like, there's something about that I need to more fully understand, and I'm not going to understand it by the end of the series. Okay, so this whole kerfuffle, apparently, my notes here are a bit complicated, but apparently, like, the full stop on it was the Treaty of Berlin, which was signed in that same year, in 1878. The Treaty of Berlin was put together at the Congress of Berlin. It's on Wikipedia. It's called a peace treaty. It's a treaty to keep peace, but it's also like a settlement treaty. Because they were actually giving it to the Austro-Hungarians, and kind of, the sub-point Novi Pazar, which is now in Serbia and borders Kosovo today, was also agreed in this treaty to be jointly administered between the Austrians and the Ottomans, in case you were wondering. But the thing which I find really interesting about this peace treaty, which is just, only just popped out to me today, was that this was actually the first time that big powers formally recognised the existence of Romania, Serbia, and Montenegro as 3 separate states. That's pretty damn cool. I feel like this Treaty of Berlin is actually a turning point, not just because it kind of put a bit of a band-aid over that little Bosnian crisis, but also because it recognised these things. And I'll read out the list of great powers which were at the table to sign this treaty, and thus afterwards recognised the existence of Montenegro, Serbia, and Romania. The great powers were Austria-Hungary, France, Russia, the UK, Italy, and last but not least, the sick man of Europe, the Ottoman Empire, also recognised the states which had, basically broken off from the Ottoman Empire. So that's kind of that. The next episode, we're going to dive into the First Balkan War,